PowerPoint presentation. I only have 2 miserable slides to show you guys. But I think you can get used to my sweet but also tones, and it'll be fine. I'm a big picture kind of person. I knew when I came into this conference after 17 years of it that you guys would have all the scholarship perfectly down. So I want to do something a little bit more abstract and corollary to basic income, if you will. So I divide this into 2 parts. One is a historical lesson, so to speak, and the other is where we can go from basic income. This is a chart by economic historian Gregory Clark. And it shows global average incomes going back about 3,000 years. It wasn't until the industrial age, as noted up there, marked by what he calls the Great Divergence, that a large increase in global incomes actually occurred. Before then, incomes had been basically locked in this oscillating low access state. He called it the Malthusian trap. If you're familiar with Thomas Malthus, that would make sense. I won't go into that. But there was no real burst of productivity during this very long stretch of time until the rise of technology, scientific ingenuity upon the Industrial Revolution. Yet this process doesn't go back just 3,000 years, of course. It really goes back 12,000 years to the Neolithic Revolution, the dawn of agriculture. And long story short, this change from hunter-gatherer societies to settled agrarian societies is, to date, the most notable shift of economic process in human history. It's not talked about enough. It seems vague in general. Extremely important information to be learned from this. To overgeneralize, civilization has continued to adapt and build upon the survival requisites of the structure that was created during this time to culminate what we call market capitalism today with most of its dominant features. In other words, there's a basic internal logic to what it meant to live as an agrarian worker, farming, and so on, to the creation of settlements, labor specialization, trade, networks for markets, the need for ownership, and so on. And if you take all that, and I've written about this extensively, I'm sorry if I gloss over this, but to encapsulate it all, what you have translated into common terms of political economy is property or ownership, capital, the means of production, labor specialization, jobs, government, of course, regulation, protection, law, police, military. All of this was codified during this was quite slow development in the Neolithic Revolution, but it's all embedded in it, so to speak. However, the Great Divergence up there, as pointed out, the rapid technological rise of scientific advancements upon the Industrial Revolution, shook this up. It shook it up quite dramatically, and we've been experiencing the repercussions of this ever since. A lot of our normative assumptions historically, such as, for example, in the Judeo-Christian Bible, it says the poor will always be among you. That's a pretty dark statement. That's an assumption in the past of the way the future, basically a negative cynical view of the future. We'll never be able to group of the poor. They'll always be with you. This is the value system and the sense of philosophy that's been created because of the dawn of the Neolithic Revolution. And naturally, we live in a world of stories, right? Narratives we're taught in culture that seek to justify the way things are. And while basic income isn't a relatively new idea, of course, the meaning behind it is extremely upsetting to our normative economic assumptions, more so than I think many realize. Namely, the idea of seeing the material progress of society as something that should be shared. And I think when it comes to the term human rights, if you needed to establish an objective referent to what it means to have a right to something, it means that you're participating in it in some way. And that's exactly what we've been doing as a civilization. All knowledge is serially generated. It's created laterally in real time, such as what we're doing right now, sharing ideas. And it's created over generational time, such as the old Isaac Newton quote, "I've done what I've done because I stood on the shoulders of giants." So this contrasting idea that today, that innovation and invention can only be this private, competitive arrangement, and those who sell the most of an idea are good, corporations, so on, they disproportionately deserve all those fruits and all those sales. This is philosophically fraudulent from an epistemological standpoint. It doesn't make any sense. The intellectual, scientific, and technological advances we see in society are inherently social. It's all social. There's no individual action. Even the geniuses that we hold up are not really embracing. They didn't invent the whole scholarship and knowledge they worked upon to develop, say, the work of Nikola Tesla or Edison or Albert Einstein. All serially generated. And that's extremely important as a fundamental realization. And it's going to become even more important as time moves on with the power power of other things I'm going to talk about now, where we're seeing a merger of the group mind. We're seeing this incredible, profound state where we can begin to develop and create efficiency in our economy and society in ways never before seen, only capable if we do it with the group mind and create networks of education. Obviously, the intuition of this is already there, the internet, and so on and so forth. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. Our human rights, through generational time, we are linked to this progress, and that's why, as far as I'm concerned, it's a human right, definitively so. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is where we end up after, or I should say, where all of this fits together. It's more systemic and synergetic. I'm not saying it's a linear process, but obviously, universal basic income or guaranteed, whatever you want to call it, all of that pertains to helping the individual and helping, remove class structure, oppression, helping groups that have been oppressed throughout time and so on. That's a big part of it. But at the same time, we have all sorts of other economic problems that have to be considered. And it all has to become synergetic in some way, such as, for example, our ecology is a big problem. And there will be some ecological things that happen with the application of more efficient distribution systems and so on, and finance and so on, income. But it's never going to really harness it if we're still using the same system of market economics that we do. So we're still trapped in something that's extremely unsustainable, even with basic income. So this chart, this figure is from a book I wrote last year, and there are 5 major transitions, I call them, that we should be expecting. They're already occurring as we speak. They're just not being understood properly, they're not being harnessed, and they're not being amplified the way they should. I'm going to go through each of these briefly. Automation, access, open source, localization, networked digital feedback, also known as the Internet of Things. I'm going to go through each one. Each one of these represents basically a more efficient mechanism, replacing an older mechanism to achieve higher productivity, the least amount of waste and environmental impact. And if any or all of these changes were achieved, you would see an incredible increase in general public health, incrementally in fact, not to mention improved ecological sustainability. And again, they're not obscure ideas. These aren't randomly pulled out of thin air or in some kind of theoretical approach. All this stuff is happening right now. Again, it's just not being harnessed properly. So we'll start with automation. Human automation is now inverse to productivity in the sectors where automation is applied. That's profound. I know we talk about that a lot in the community for basic income, but just that fact, it goes deeper than just the generation of abundance. What is the greatest form of social oppression in human history? The oppression of labor. Doesn't matter who's that labor party, doesn't matter what their skin color was, doesn't matter what gender they are, or even how old they were, depending on what stage of capitalism you want to refer to. We have been exploiting each other for human labor in the most abusive contexts. I can't think of anything, besides the fact, of course, that we have to compensate for this automation that's been talked about before. But if you can remove the actual facet of labor for income, if you can actually think that far, you would see a completely different culture emerge on this planet, one that isn't as fearful, one that isn't constantly looking to screw each other over, and so on and so forth. Access. This refers to favoring access over property. It seems a little foreign to most that are taught traditional economics, but what do we see now? We see things like Uber, we see sharing systems emerging. We see things like tool libraries and things like where people can go in and they can share things that they own, and people can check them out, return them, just like a library in general. It seems almost primitive, but it's incredibly profound as an idea if it's networked properly. In terms of, like, for example, a car. There's 257 million cars in America, and this is outstanding. 257 million consumer vehicles in general as of 2015. But all those cars are used 5% of the time. That's it. So in theory, only 14 million cars would be needed to meet such demand. And think about the reduction of waste if you were able to achieve that type of automated car system, which of course, again, is happening now through different companies that just see the merit from a financial standpoint, because they're going to save on labor. That can be applied to so many things, and I want to plant that seed. It's another process that we call ephemeralization. It's a term coined by Buckminster Fuller. Everything in our economic realm is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and more powerful and more efficient. And we have to think about that in terms of the network of society. Instead of looking at, say, a computer or a chip on your phone that's more powerful than the first computer by a long shot, and of course infinitely smaller, what if we apply that same type of more with less ephemeralization efficiency phenomenon to actual city systems? And if you think about that, you really put that together, as I'm going to continue here, it's stunning the kind of abundance and the kind of society that could be generated if we started to actually work together in an intelligent, networked, systems-oriented way. Excuse me, typo there. So the next thing I want to talk about is open source. Open source, going back to the comment about we share all knowledge, it's laterally shared and shared through generational time. Open source is properly networked, as it's starting to become, once again, if everyone was able to contribute to the development of basically anything, and the educational system was altered, people could learn engineering, they could learn things that were more relevant than, say, being in business or being in finance. And suddenly you had an open source system, open access system, where people could actually develop and create goods and products without the need for corporations. Ponder that for a second. That would be one of the most incredible things you could possibly achieve as a collective civilization, which leads me to localization combined with open source, combined with access, and combined with automation. Localization begins to harness everything. So why do we have industries disparately thrown all over the planet? Because it's a form of colonialism. Globalization is a form of power control through trade agreements. In part, there are some benefits, yes. We've seen some fruits of globalization, but it really was born out of colonization. And the fact that an American food plate travels about 2,000 miles before it even reaches the plate, that's preposterous in an advanced technological society we have today. So you localize all of your production. There's no reason that here in Hamilton to develop systems that can take care of the basic fundamental needs directly in a local environment without having to ship strawberries in from Bolivia and so on and so forth. And the final thing I'll briefly discuss is the Internet of Things or digitized network feedback. Going back to that systems approach to all of this, localization, access, automation, open source, the thread that holds it all together, which again is occurring right now, is the Internet of Things. This ability to actually engage in real time with each other, not to mention understand what we're actually doing in terms of our economic footprint. Today, economic information it moves very, very slowly, weeks to months in some cases, in terms of collecting the data and getting it back to the economists. The economists have to foreshadow. I always laugh when people refer to economists as forecasters. Isn't that just hilarious? Why are we forecasting the economy like it's a weather system? It doesn't, that's really weird. To think that we can't understand what we're actually doing in a society, in a city, on the planet. So that is the final thread between all of those other four things. And you put these things together, you can end up with an incredible, efficient system that goes way beyond the merits of universal basic income, because you're actually generating what is a true economy that is purposefully designed to actually take care of people. So you combine all those things together, and that's the kind of stuff I talked about today, but I hope that